Hello, everyone. Everyone. This is a video about the Unite the Right rally that took place on August 12th of last year in Charlottesville, Virginia. Many of you will be familiar with the general events of the day. It was a rally attended by far-right figures such as Richard Spencer and David Duke, organized to protest the removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert Lee from a park in Charlottesville. Shortly before the event was scheduled to begin amid violent clashes between Unite the Right attendees and protesters, the rally was declared an unlawful assembly and police began clearing the park. Soon afterwards, a white supremacist drove his car into a group of counter-protesters, injuring several people, one fatally. He was later arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Now, this fatal attack was obviously the main news story that came out of the event, but also noteworthy were President Trump's later comments to reporters about the rally. Firstly, condemning hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides, and then later saying that there were in attendance at the rally very fine people on both sides, comments for which he was widely condemned. So that's the Unite the Right rally in a nutshell there. So what is the purpose of my video? Well, primarily, it's to examine some of the alt-right responses to Charlottesville which emerged in the months after the rally was held. For example, if you search for Unite the Right on YouTube, well, the first result is a Vice News video featuring scenes from the rally alongside interviews with organizers and speakers at the event, including Speaker Christopher Cantwell. We were asking whether white people were capable of violence. I didn't say capable. Of course we capable. I'm carrying a pistol. I go to the gym all the time. I'm trying to make myself more capable of violence. And true to his word, Cantwell was later arrested for pepper spraying anti-fascist protesters at the rally. His tearful video explaining the situation earned him the moniker the Crying Nazi. So, that's interesting, isn't it, to start with? One of the speakers at the rally was arrested for violence at the rally. That's just something to remember for later. Anyway, only a few videos below that one in the YouTube search results is this video. The Truth About Charlottesville Unite the Right by James Allsup, with over 80,000 views. Now, James Allsup is an alt-right YouTuber who was present at Unite the Right live streaming it. There he is there. Now, this video was released very soon after the Unite the Right rally, when obviously, what with the white nationalist terror attack that killed someone, the mainstream opinion of the Unite the Right attendees was rather low. And Allsup's video is one of many white nationalist attempts to put the brakes on that narrative, so there's lots of deflection, attempts at recontextualization, and outright lies. Don't take me word for it, though. We'll start looking at those in a little while. But firstly, I'd like to ask a question. James Allsup live streamed the Unite the Right rally, and he uses clips from his live stream in his video. But he has since taken that stream down. Likewise, other alt-right figures such as Baked Alaska were present at the rally, and Baked Alaska also live-streamed the event and has also since taken his stream down. So why did they do this? Surely if James Allsup wanted us to see the truth about Charlottesville, he could have left his unedited stream up on YouTube. You can't get more truthful than a direct video of the event after all. So my question is, what are they trying to hide? Luckily, there were plenty of willing cameramen at the rally who have not deleted their live streams. There are dozens of hours of footage from Charlottesville from a variety of different sources online, and using those, we can show exactly what happened pretty much throughout the entire day. Firstly, though, we'll briefly run through the events that led up to the Unite the Right rally. So in early 2016, A Charlottesville high school student started a petition to remove Confederate monuments from Charlottesville parks. Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy agreed and held a press conference in which he urged the removal of the monuments. For this, Bellamy drew the ire of white nationalist Jason Kessler, the man who would later organize the Unite the Right rally, who started a petition to get Bellamy removed from office. Incidentally, in January of 2017, while out collecting signatures for said petition, Jason Kessler assaulted someone. "I was just having a bad day. I've never done this kind of thing before." Jason Kessler admits that he punched this man, James Taylor, in the face. Man to man, you can expect to get punched if you yell in another man's face. Kessler pled guilty in court and was sentenced to complete 50 hours of community service. So that's the organizer of the free speech rally there, a man who punches people who say things that he doesn't like. Anyway, back to the timeline. Back to the timeline. In early 2017, the city council voted to remove the statue of Robert Lee from Emancipation Park, which kicked off a bit of an endless legal battle about whether or not the city can actually remove the statues or not. More relevant for us, though, is that it drew harsh criticism from conservatives and far-right figures. In April of 2017, Jason Kessler, white nationalist Richard Spencer at a protest in Washington, D.C. Kessler and Spencer decided to hold a rally protesting the removal of Charlottesville's Confederate monuments to be held on May 13th. Now, the May 13th demonstration was a relatively small affair compared to the later Unite the Right rally. Speeches were given in Jackson Park by the likes of Richard Spencer and Mike Inoch, the host of the anti-Semitic podcast The Daily Show. Show being the Hebrew word for Holocaust there, so a lovely chap. And later on May 13th, the protesters moved to Lee Park with lit torches, but this gathering quickly broke up and left the park after police turned up. The next significant protest against the removal of the Confederate monuments was held on July the 8th by the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, those guys. This rally was a rather messy affair that eventually saw police use tear gas to disperse the crowd of counter-protesters. I want to go into the July the 8th rally all too deeply, but I use it to introduce this report. The independent review of the 2017 protest events in Charlottesville, Virginia, compiled by the law firm Hunton Williams and commissioned by the city. This report is highly critical of the Charlottesville Police Department's handling of the rally in a section titled "What Went Wrong." The report contains subsections titled "Law Enforcement Failed to Operate Within a Unified Command." Law enforcement allowed media inside the law enforcement zone. The operational plan created insufficient space for opposing groups, and crucially, the deployment of tear gas was unauthorized by command, which says there was no unified plan or understanding as to who would authorize the use of tear gas on July the 8th. In other words, the police were just rubbish. This smaller event serves as a preview for the mistakes the police would make on August 12th at the Unite the Right rally, and this police incompetence drew major criticism from the alt-right after the event. So we're going to go through the events of the entirety of the Unite the Right rally now, while paying particular attention to the mistakes the police made throughout the day. So late on August 11th, the day before the rally was scheduled, a group of white nationalists marched through the University of Virginia's campus, chanting Nazi slogans and throwing Nazi salutes. This was an unscheduled event that was not announced beforehand, so there were few counter-protesters and a delayed police response. The marchers surrounded the few counter-protesters that were present and held abuse at them, and several fights broke out, which the police broke up when they finally arrived. And we'll come back and talk about the torch rally a little more later on, but for now, let's move on to the main event. And I suppose I should introduce our cameraman here. For the first part of the day, I will be mainly showing footage from the live stream organized by members of the alt-right's since deleted Discord server. This is from the video titled Unite the Right All-Day live stream, hosted on the channel The Bic. This stream covers events prior to the police clearing the park. After that, we'll be following Baked Alaska's crew, whose stream started just prior to the park being cleared. Now, Baked Alaska and James Allsup both deleted their streams, as I mentioned, but this chap here, in the red shirt and the helmet with the Kyrgyzstan flag on the front, his stream still exists. So we can follow that stream for the rest of the day. We'll be dipping into a few other sources as we go, but those are our two main camera crews there, the alt-right Discord channel and Baked Alaska and his entourage. And I also have a few clips from James Allsup's deleted stream which were re-uploaded to YouTube by somebody else. Now, that person has added their own subtitles and annotations over the video, somewhat annoyingly, most of which I've blanked out. So if you see a clip with a bit of the screen missing, that's James Allsup's deleted stream. Starting off with the Discord crew, then. They began the day in a car park in Centaur Park, waiting to be bused to the event. As they re-milling about, we see several far-right figures in the assembled groups. There's David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of Thalk. Mike Anach is there. Richard Spencer is there with his crew, of course. And they also take the time to interview Jason Kessler. You can't stop the alt-right. There's a warning to anybody across the country who tries to shut us down. They gonna fail. This is gonna be the largest demonstration in the history of the alt-right so far, and we'll only get bigger from here. Get ready for kiboshing on a massive, massive scale from the left-wing media, but fuck them, you know. They already trying to run their narratives about us being violent or whatever. Of course we gonna defend ourselves. Of course we gonna defend ourselves. But the media tries to portray it that we the violent ones. But you all see today, of course, I mean, given what happens in a few hours, he couldn't have been more wrong about that. We also see Nathan Amigo, founder of the group Identity Europa, seen here at an earlier protest, punching a woman in the face. Amigo has also done time in prison for pulling a gun on a cab driver and robbing him for, quote, looking Eureka. Is anyone keeping score, by the way, for the organizers of this thing? It'd probably be quicker to list the ones who haven't been arrested for assaulting someone. Anyway, after the little meet and greet in the car park, groups start heading over to Emancipation Park by van. And it's here that the first big mistake the Charlottesville police made comes into play. So we'll leave the rally attendees en route for the moment and talk about the police action plan for the day. So this plan went through several designs before it arrived at the one that was circulated on August 7th, a few days before the rally. Now, there are a few problems with this plan, the first of which will have been spotted already by any keen-eyed viewers out there. They spelled the name of the rally wrong. Unite the Right. Anyway, on this map, the police deployment areas are designated by the zone arrows. So they had 5 separate deployment areas total. Although it's worth noting here that Virginia State Police were working with an earlier version of the plan that had 4 deployment zones. So the commanders were confused when they turned up. Off to a great start there. So this plan sections off a quarter of the park for the Unite the Right rally, and a quarter of the park is designated a public area. So that's for the counter-protesters. The police deployed to Zone 2 would be between the double barricade, keeping the two groups separate. And the police deployed to Zone 5, the road to the south of the park, would be there to break up fights and make arrests. Great plan, on paper, spelling mistakes aside. So how did we get from this plan to just one big mess of people fighting in the streets of the south of the park? Well, it's because of a couple of key last-minute changes that were made by the police department. So back to the unit the right attendees that are en route to the rally by van. When the police learned that the vans would be dropping people off to the west of the park, they switched the designated areas for protesters and counter-protesters. They did this less than 24 hours before the rally was scheduled to begin. And quoting the Hunton and Williams report, it appears that no efforts were made to communicate the zone designation to counter-protest groups. From later in the report, we can see the effect that this zone switching had. At 9:42, the first organized group of demonstrators carrying the flag of Identity Europa, Remember Them, and led by L.A. Mosley, entered the public area of Emancipation Park through the southeast entrance. Body camera footage shows Mosley walking over to the police officers stationed in Zone 2 and asking whether they were in the right section of the park. Officers told Mosley that the designated unit the right area was in the opposite section. Mosley called out to his group to form up and go around to the other side. And this misunderstanding is something that was repeated throughout the day with the various different alt-right groups. So the arriving rally attendees are confused about where they were supposed to be. And to change zones, they have to walk along the road to the south of the park. But that's okay, right? What about all the police officers stationed in Zone 5 to break up fights and keep the protesters apart? Well, that's the other last-minute change that was made to this plan. And I quote, Captain Lewis told us it was her understanding Zone 5 officers would be tasked with breaking up fights on Market Street. But the parking lot backed up to the Wells Fargo building where the Unified Command Center would be hosted. They've insisted that the entire area be protected by barricades. Complied with the request and installed barricades along the surface parking lot south of Emancipation Park. This crucial change effectively stationed the officers in Zone 5 behind barricades, much like the officers assigned to the other four zones. To the others, that's they've stationed Leo, the battlefield is As a result, no officers were assigned to open areas in which protesters and counter-protesters would interact. And indeed, the Hunton Williams report, written by people who had access to all the police body cam footage for the day, notes only one instance of an officer leaving the barricaded zones in order to break up a fight. So the very poorly communicated last-minute changes to the police plan ensured that basically nobody was aware of where they were supposed to be. And the inability of the police to respond to the changing circumstances saw them mostly just standing there watching it happen. And, I quote, F's directed its officers to remain behind barricades rather than risk injury responding to conflicts between protesters and counter-protesters. Yeah, that's your job, though. You know, kinda. Another genius moment from the Charlottesville Police Department is this one. Mitchell told us he intentionally channeled entry to and exit from the interior of the park through the staircases at its southeast and southwest corners. He explained to us that such a design would force attendees to walk around and enter at those controlled locations. Through communications with Jason Kessler and his security personnel, he agreed to allow Unite the Right security members to act as doormen at the entry point to ensure only demonstrators would enter the appropriate quadrant of the park. So when you see the alt-right shield wall blocking off the entrance to the park, that's by design. That's part of the police plan. They allowed the alt-right to police their own event. And of course, this particular shield wall is blocking off the entrance to the public area of the park because they don't know where they were supposed to be. So this big mess of people was inevitable, really. And the police do deserve the alliance share of the blame here. However, I'm not about to let the alt-right off the hook that easily. They themselves repeatedly exacerbated the situation unnecessarily. First off, once the Unite the Right attendees were actually inside their own rally, they repeatedly ran groups back outside to fight with counter-protesters. One live stream from just outside the barricades captured one of these groups being organized and moved out. And this is how the alt-right Discord stream ends, actually. They then form up into one of these groups and run out of the park. The other big criticism of the alt-right I have here is the unnecessary presence of the speakers and, quote, VIPs outside the rally. Because the police actually did do one thing right on the day. They organized an unmarked police escort to move the noteworthy alt-right figures and rally speakers to the park. The plan was to bring the VIPs into the park around the back, safely under police protection. So it's kind of confusing to then hear Richard Spencer complain about being attacked on his way into the park. Okay, so here's another point that's got to be made. The communists were doing all the attacking from the outside. They were throwing bricks. I got assaulted by Antifa as I was entering. Oh, I did too, we all did. Other people were sprayed with pepper spray or mayonnaise. I don't know which one it was. It was absolutely terrible. And we elsewhere see James also complain about Baked Alaska being attacked on his way into the park, where the police were on what I believe was the south side of the park. They formed a line on the south side of the park where there were no counter-demonstrators or no protesters. And they left the north end of the park where people were funneling into. Myself, Baked Alaska, and others completely unguarded and unprotected. We were essentially, thrown to the wolves and were actually forced, and I'll show this video here too, forced to break through the line of anti-Unite the Right demonstrators. So how was this possible? What happened to that police escort? And I quote, just after 9 a.m. Sergeant Tony Newberry, the detective who had been in touch with Unite the Right security organizer Jack Pierce about getting speakers and VIPs into the park, was driving around the downtown area with his partner in an unmarked van. Pierce had refused to share where the speakers would be gathering that day to assemble for the convoy, but Newberry knew by now that they were at Mcintyre Park. As the morning went on and groups began to gather, Newberry was anxious to get the speakers and VIPs into the park. Newberry called Pierce's cell phone and told him, "There's never going to be a better time than right now." Pierce said he understood and responded he would get everyone together and call Newberry back. A few minutes later, Pierce called back and told Newberry that the speakers had changed their minds about coming in separately because they wanted to walk in with their audiences. There will be no police escort from Cintira Park. Newberry told us he had a hunch that Pierce had been tricked into working with him and that the Raleigh organizers had never planned to be brought in the back of the park. After the call ended, Newberry turned to his partner in the van and told him they do not plan on this going well. So you can't really blame the police for anything that happened to the speakers and VIPs entering the event as they turned down available police protection. And I'd like to say a few more things about James Allsup and Baked Alaska's entrance to the park here. Allsup himself lets us know the time that they arrived. However, from the timeline of events, we can see that the unlawful assembly was called half an hour earlier at 11:31, which means Baked Alaska, James Allsup and crew, when they forced their way through the line of counter-protesters to get into the park, were pushing their way into an unlawful assembly. So when James Allsup says, right, they were trying to inhibit our movement, they were forming blockades to block us from entering the event, that's unlawful detention. That's a form of violence. Sorry, James, but that just isn't true. The Raleigh was an unlawful assembly by that point. You were also forcing your way into the wrong area of the park, the designated counter-protester area. But of course we can't really blame you for that misunderstanding. That one is mainly on the police for changing the zones. I almost feel bad for the Unite the Right VIPs here. They traveled all the way there, they turned down the police escort, and then they hear that the event is being called off. So they have to book it down to the park as fast as possible and force their way in so they can film themselves getting thrown out. To justify the trip, a guess, or a sad little display. Anyway, let's get back to our timeline, with the police now clearing the park. And this leads us to yet another big mistake made by the police. They put no thought into how the crowds would disperse after the rally was over. As the crowd dispersed, law enforcement failed to prevent and respond to violent confrontations in and around the park. Those in the park at the time of the unlawful assembly were pushed straight south into the area on Market Street where counter-protesters had assembled. Predictably, violent confrontations occurred as the Unite the Right protesters streamed past the counter-protesters. Rather than separate the crowds and break up individual fights, troopers stood behind barricades as people left the park. Vcodec officers who could have de-escalated confrontations stood in the back of Emancipation Park, acting as a rear guard for this field force. This thoughtless attitude towards the aftermath of clearing the park had fatal consequences. And I quote from later in the report, Officer Tammy Shiflett was in a vulnerable position at her assigned post at the intersection of 4th Street Northeast and Market Street. Although she is a sworn police officer and carries a firearm, Officer Shiflett is a school resource officer who works in an elementary school, and she had just returned to active duty following more than 2 months of leave while recovering from elbow surgery. In the face of the Market Street skirmishes that broke out after the unlawful assembly declaration, Officer Shiflett felt unsafe and radioed for assistance. She was soon reassigned and she moved her vehicle away from that intersection. After Officer Shiflett departed, all that remained at the crucial intersection was a wooden sawhorse barricade. Lieutenant Steve Nick, the traffic supervisor, was not aware Officer Shiflett had been reassigned. No one in the command center fought to replace Officer Shiflett with other officers or install any additional barricades. And this, of course, was the street where James Alex Fields was then able to drive his car into the group of counter-protesters, an attack that was made possible by the poor planning and lack of communication within the Charlottesville Police Department. We'll talk more about James Alex Fields later on. For now, Let's rejoin Baked Alaska and crew who are in the large group of rally attendees making their way back to Mcintyre Park. At some point, Baked Alaska's stream crosses paths with David Dukes and Baked Alaska tells him that he loves him. At another point, someone convinces Baked Alaska to spray soap in his own eyes, which is kind of funny. So as this ridiculous procession moved down the road, Richard Spencer arrived in a convoy of cars, leading to a terribly pathetic outbreak of fanboyism from all present. Richard says, "Oh, Spencer, och, we redoing it. We redoing it. Hold on, hold on. Watch out for the pole. Call him and tell him I'm coming up there. Tell Spencer I'm coming." Richard Spencer and the Empigo is making a surprise appearance. All right. All right. Wait, which lane? Which lane? James Allsup sprints up the road to a tree to hold traffic for Spencer's car and gets completely shut down by some random guy. Hey guys, goies, goies, goies. Don't cross. We need to get Richard. Richard's in his car. He needs to get out. I don't give a fuck about Richard Spencer. Och, well. Allsup later talks to a friend about David Duke. Did you see Dr. Duke? I did. Was he here? David Duke was the Duke. The Dukester himself. I disavowed. Yeah, of course, disavowed. Of course. I'm seeing a lot of murdered shirts. I disavow, of course. I love that particular backpedal there because it contrasts beautifully with a section from his Unite the Right video. Repeatedly stated my position on nazism. I'm not a Nazi, but no amount of disavowing. And I've realized this after dealing with the media very hard for the last week or so. No amount of disavowing is going to convince the leftists, oh, he's not a Nazi. Now, James, the problem isn't with disavowing Nazis and racists not being good enough. Because it is. The problem is with you disavowing Nazis and racists. Because when you disavow Nazis and racists, you obviously lying. You know, you don't get to frantically cheer for Richard Spencer and get all excited when you hear David Duke is present and then go, well, of course, I disavow. You know, who do you think that's supposed to fool? You retreating disavowing something like a get-out-of-jail-free card in Monopoly. You could at least act like you mean it, you know. Let's stick with James for a bit and move on and talk about the signs, flags, and iconography present at the rally. Being completely honest, there were a couple people there with swastika flags or Hitler iconography or whatever. And I was reviewing the live streams of the event that baked Alaska did start. And then Matt took over 4 and that I had. And in all of our footage, I think I saw a combined 3 swastika flags. 3 swastika flags. Okay. And so let's say, for every swastika flag there are 10 nazis there in support. Okay, so that puts you at 30 nazis, right? So James also apparently didn't personally see many swastika flags. So that means that there weren't many neo-nazis at the event. Now we could go through the various videos and streams and find all the instances of people waving swastika flags. There's obviously the one that Allsup includes in his video. And here's another one. And another one. And another one. And so on. And here's a chap in a swastika shirt even. However, that would be the wrong way to answer James Allsup's claim, because that would buy into the idea that the only way to spot a neo-Nazi is to see them waving a swastika flag. There were, after all, lots of other flags and symbols on display at the rally. So let's take a look at a few of those. First up, this here is a black sun flag, also known as a Sonnenret. This is a symbol often used by neo-Nazis because it was once used by the precursors to the neo-Nazis. The Nazis. Here it is on the floor of the former General's Hall at Wolfsburg Castle in Germany. I pronounced that wrong, which was operated by Heinrich Himmler SS during the Second World War. If you see someone waving a black sun flag at a rally, they basically waving a swastika flag, but they trying to be clever about it. Here it is on a bunch of shields. And this guy seems to have mixed it in with a Confederate flag, which is a bit odd. And here's a variant of that flag in a photo with a group of odd fellows throwing Nazi salutes. Now, the cheery guy in the center there is Matthew Hambach, who was one of the listed speakers at the rally. Incidentally, Matthew Hambach was arrested for domestic battery during the editing of this video. Interesting little tidbit there. And here's another black sun shield in the right of a photograph alongside some shields bearing a logo of the white supremacist group Vanguard America. Now, center in this photo is James Alex Fields, the person who later drove his car into the crowd of counter-protesters. Next up is this flag. This is the flag of the United States National Socialist Movement. And I hope I don't have to explain the origins of that name. They put in quite a showing at Charlottesville. They had a big banner and a bunch of flags and members in attendance wearing their shirts. Now, this flag is actually a 2016 redesign of their former flag, which looked like this. And I'm not sure we need an Enigma machine to decipher this Nazi code. They swapped out the swastika for this rune, an odal rune variants of which were used by 2 different divisions during the Second World War. So if you see someone waving this flag, they again waving a swastika flag, but trying to be clever about it. Coincidentally, one of these flags is in the footage James also shows as he's saying he didn't spot many swastikas. This is a banner advertising the website The Daily Stormer, which is named for the former Nazi propaganda newspaper Der Stürmer, or The Stormer. The Daily Stormer had quite a little following going at the rally, but more on them in a moment. So here to James Allsup, I would say this. It doesn't matter how many swastika flags you personally happen to see at the rally. The acceptable amount of swastika flags at the rally would be 0. You can't get away with saying, well, only some of us were Nazis, so how could you judge us as a group? The event was called Unite the Right. If you're tolerant of any nasis being there at all, you're talking about uniting the nasis with everyone else. Secondly, swastikas aside, as we've just seen, other Nazi imagery was everywhere. It was impossible to miss. So either James is so naive that he does not recognize the meaning of group names like the National Socialist Movement, and he thinks the swastika is the only permissible identifier of Nazi sympathies, or he's attempting to twist the truth to mislead his audience. Anyway, back to the symbols. Besides the explicit Nazi flags, there was all the usual white supremacist stuff: Crusader imagery, Deus Vult shields, iron crosses, and so on, and more appropriation of Norse symbols and runes like this Fold-Not flag. Of course, the Kekistan flag was out and about, seen here on one of the streamers' helmets. What a dork! The Kekistan flag is not much more than a green recoloring of a Nazi flag. Proponents, of course, claim it's all a joke, but there comes a point when if neo-Nazis like your joke flag and start waving your joke flag alongside their other completely not a joke flags, maybe but it's time to come up with a better joke. There were also flags for various, quote, identitarian groups present at the rally, such as the previously mentioned Identity Europa. Leaders and members of Identity Europa, such as former leader Ele Mosley, have praised Nazi Germany and have openly pushed for what they say is the Nazification of America. Is anyone shocked by that at this point? I mean, anyone watching this who has not already worked out what these people are is probably never going to see what these people are. Now, the strangest seeming flag at the event was this one. This is the flag of Rhodesia, or rather a flag of Rhodesia, apartheid state Rhodesia, when it existed, of course, which in this crowd kinda resolves that mystery, to be honest. Here it is alongside the apartheid era flag of South Africa on a jacket worn by Dylan Roof, a white supremacist who in 2015 murdered 9 African Americans in a mass shooting at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. Dylan Roof is currently serving a life sentence in prison. Current sentence, serving, I mentioned Dylan Roof here because it's time to move on to the next section of my video. It's time to hear these people speak. And Dylan Roof comes up a few times in the footage you watched. There's that line between edgy and advocating bombing of the classroom for the 4th grade. This is self-defense bombing. We need to mass produce. We need to mass produce bowl cut wigs. We really need to not like heroes. Dylan Roof. We need to heroize. The bowl cut mentioned there being a reference to Dylan Roof's haircut. Incidentally, here's Christopher Cantwell over on Gab A sharing a photograph of himself with Dylan Roof's hair photoshopped on top, fantasizing about shooting children, making jokes about Roof and his actions, calling him a hero even, is really telling. These people really do support murdering black people, Jewish people, various other minorities they don't like. And again, don't take me word for it. Let's listen to the rest of what they have to say. And we'll start off by hearing a few of their chants. Blood and toil, blood and toil, blood and toil. Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. So 2 chants from the torch rally there. Jews will not replace us. Self-explanatory, that one I should hope. And blood and soil. Now, Blood and soil was a slogan popular in, if you can believe it, surprise, Nazi Germany. And sticking with that theme, with stick kicking, with the other theme, tomorrow belongs to us. Tomorrow belongs to us. Tomorrow belongs to us. Tomorrow belongs to us. Either an enormous coincidence or a reference to the song Tomorrow Belongs to Me from the 1972 film Cabaret, which is sung by a member of the Hitler Youth. As for the non-Nazi chants, few that they were, well, they were pretty much as you'd expect. Fuck you, faggots. Fuck you, faggots. Fuck you, faggots. As for casual conversation, well, I listened through hours of it. And I'm going to include a series of clips here demonstrating how the rally attendees speak to each other, what they think is funny, and what they think are acceptable opinions to express. And I apologize for having to include all of this in the video, but I do feel it is necessary, so here we go. Ben Schickelman Goldberg said he really likes you. Are you single? No, sorry. Ben Schickelman Goldberg. Not one of them. He's a good boy, boys. Just like Job. Well, I'm just curious. Jello race traitor, no exceptions. Oh, man. The big uck, hold on. Saying that you should have sex with the big black beautiful Negroes. That's disgusting. Sorry, I'm not in the bestiality. Base sub-Saharan. We re-talking about the non-white stormers. Did you guys see the base abo in the flag jacket or whatever? Wait, there's an abo here. There's an abo. Oh, what the fuck? West Melody is a nigger. You know, I don't even give a shit if a little fucking soy boy bitch sees me face. Look, my bosses hate niggers and Jews anyway, you fucking communists. So why don't you go fucking hang yourself? On this stream, you're definitely going to see some people get wrecked. You're going to see some little Jewish kids being suplexed. It's not going to be pretty. We rebuilding an oven and it just got 10 feet taller after yesterday. The Nazis were basically pacifists compared to us. We back. Me and Matt are back. Hell yeah. You will not replace us. You and your cultural Marxist faggot bullshit. You will not replace us. They thought we wouldn't stand up. Guess what? We standing up for our rights. We proud to be white. We proud to be white, brother. Proud to be white. We proud to be white. Hail victory. Hell yeah. Thank you. Black Lives Matter. Today, you all remember that 40 Antifa stood against, when 40 Antifa stood up with our Holocaust tattoos against the Nazis yet again. Got some, oh God, got some big Nazi asses in me face. Oh my ass neck and me, nas neck and me. Oh, my spine and me spleen and scabula. Oh, my hemorrhoids. I got to take some zinc. Oh, look at all these goyim with these nice haircuts. Well, she's, or journalist, I think. We haven't seen any journalists here yet. Some actual accredited people. New York Times. Oh, they read from the New York Times and the New York Daily News and all these red bagels. Oh, no, I'm Jewish. I'm not a Nazi. I am Jewish. Jewish. I just had a lip shoot asking if I was Jewish. I was like, oh goodness. She found me out. Oh shit. Oh God. I hope the nazis don't to beat me up. What are you doing? Where are you, dude? You going to your fucking Proud Boy meetup? That's another thing. Fuck you, Gavin Sins. You a faggot too. You and your fucking Proud Boys are all faggots. All of them. Where are you? You fucking nowhere. You going to be at a fucking rally in Boston next week. You fucking faggots. You fucking losers. Your movement's done. You have no movement. This is the fucking movement. Is the fucking movement. The fucking movement. Moving. Either get on board or get the fuck out of the way. That ranty chap at the end there was Millennial Matt, the person who commandeered Baked Alaska's live stream after he was maced and wandered around saying a bunch of vile shit like what we just heard. He's also probably the main reason Baked Alaska chose to take his stream down after the event. We saw him there being very mad at far-right media figure Gavin Sins for choosing to skip the event because he didn't want to be associated with a bunch of outright nazis. So that's how the far-right talk about their own when they break ranks there. We also heard a lot from the alt-right Discord stream. They were the ones who had the cameraman who liked doing that one particular impression. They were also the ones who made the joke. The oven just got bigger, which is a telling mix of their rhetoric with that of Donald Trump there. And I'd like to contrast a couple of particular clips from their video. So here's the first one. So that's the typical deflection offered by far-right groups when they recalled nazis. You know, nazis don't exist anymore. They haven't existed since the 1930s. It's a childish attempt at using semantics to dodge. It's so very silly. So that was them talking to anti-fascist demonstrators outside the rally. And the clip I'd like to contrast that with is from later on inside the rally. The alt-right Discord stream happened to catch a speech being given in front of the Daily Stormer banner I showed earlier. Do you remember that? Let's take a listen. Didn't hit me journey, people. No. Fuck this. Ye. I love me, people. Ye. One more. I want everybody to take close attention because this is the first preset of the true alt-right. Remember it. Gas the kites race. Gas the kites race. You. Who brought the ovens? And that's how they talk inside the rally. In front of a banner that says "End Jewish control over America," they chant, "Hitler did nothing wrong." Gas the racial slurs. Race war now. And I'd like to note the complete lack of dissent in this clip. Everybody present joins in and applauds. People shout "Sieg Heil." They all to a man completely on board with this happening. Not one person attempts to break ranks. And that's how it goes. Outward facing. The rally attendees will talk about free speech, say they non-violent, they disavow Nazism, they all claim there aren't any more nazis, even. But inside, they chanting Nazi slogans and wearing Nazi iconography and waving Nazi flags, praising Hitler, talking about gassing Jewish people, throwing Hitler salutes and shouting "Sieg Heil." These people here are neo-Nazis. I think we can all agree. But does this mean that all the people at the rally were therefore neo-Nazis? Opinions are divided, but the answer is yes. Or, is that fair? I don't know. In me opinion, if you willing to walk under a Nazi flag with a bunch of Nazis and make no effort to disagree with them or counter the things they say, then you a Nazi. If I went to a Liverpool match wearing a Liverpool kit, and stood singing "You'll all never walk alone" with all the other Liverpool supporters under a big old banner, it would be reasonable to assume I was a supporter of Liverpool Football Club. But oh no, I could say, you know, I'm not really a Liverpool supporter in me mind. I just really look like one, do all the same things they do. You know, give me a break. We know what these people air. Anyone who wasn't a Nazi would have turned and left the first time they saw a swastika flag. Still, though, some people will insist it's all just a joke. Such as this chap who got surrounded by counter-protesters and stripped off his clothes, saying he's not really a racist. He's just there for a bit of fun. Now, I'd argue that this doesn't really matter, to be honest. But for those who think it does, how do we tell the difference? The difference between the, quote, real racists and the ones supposedly just there for a bit of a laugh, that is, well, the only way to tell the difference for sure is in their reactions to events like the murders committed by Dylan Roof and James Alex Fields. Once the ideology goes beyond words and becomes action, fatal action at that, you can no longer claim it's just a joke. You are all in at that point. And with that in mind, let's take a look at a few of the reactions to James Alex Fields' car attack. First up is James Allsup's response to the terror attack from his Truth About Charlottesville video. Oh wait, no it isn't, because he doesn't mention it. Beyond one passing reference to the car crash, a rather neutral phrasing for a murder there. So that's Allsup's approach, you know, just pretend it didn't happen. He elsewhere claims that all the violence came from the counter-protesters, which is an easy stance to take if you're able to tune out a terror attack originating on your side. You know, if we done to look at it, it didn't happen. That's the media-savvy alt-right tactic there. Now the other alt-right tactic is to defame the victim, Heather Heyer. Jason Kessler, who early predicted the rally attendees would be non-violent, tweeted out, and he's sharing their Daily Stormer article which says Christopher Cantwell was, of course, his usual charming self about the whole affair. The fact that nobody on our side died, I did go ahead and call that points for us. The fact that none of our people killed anybody unjustly, I think, is a plus for us. Matthew Hambach also approached reporters to say, so this is what happens when things escalate beyond speech and someone is murdered. They don to disavow the murderer, they rally around them and defend. And there was, of course, also a conspiracy theory that Heather Heyer was not hit by the car at all and instead, coincidentally, died of a heart attack nearby at around the same time. Of course, this ignores both that her death was ruled a homicide and that the medical examiner's office in Richmond, Virginia, determined that her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the torso. Regardless of the truth, however, the heart attack lay persisted. In neo-Nazi circles, obviously, but also among those seemingly with Nazi sympathies. That's white supremacist millennial was there, talking to YouTube personality Sargon of Akkad, who is, as usual, mindlessly repeating whatever rubbish he's overheard Nazis say. Is that a random jab at Sargon from me there? Well, a little bit. But I do think there's an important point to be made here about how easily white nationalist lees can spread among the lazy and uneducated. I mention it here because James Fields' trial is scheduled for later this year and all the alt-right's lies and deformations will be brought out again. They will lie about the nature of those present at the Charlottesville rally. They will lie about James Fields. They will lie about how Heather Heyer died. And we need to be vigilant in checking and correcting those lies, lest we end up as witless Nazi stooges, just like Sargon of Akkad. So that's about it for me today, folks. But I'd like to wrap up with a final thought here. James Allsup, in his Unite the Right video, rather hilariously predicts that Charlottesville would be seen as a victory for the alt-right. But where are we today? Well, the alt-right are in disarray, I'm happy to say. Richard Spencer recently posted a video calling off his college tour, citing heavy resistance by anti-fascists as the main reason why he's barely able to draw a double-digit crowd anymore. He also acknowledges Charlottesville as the turning point in the movement, and one can read between the lines and see what he wanted out of Unite the Right. The far right would turn up, pretend to be peaceful, get attacked, and then play it up and act the victim. James Fields ruined that narrative for them, of course. Alt-right figures found instead their Twitter and YouTube accounts being shut down, their web hosting taking their websites offline, their Discord servers being deleted, and the size of the anti-fascist crowds turning out to meet them at their rallies and speeches increasing. Charlottesville exposed them for what they really are, a group of cowardly Nazi thugs. They overestimated their broader support, they overplayed their hand, and they lost. However, this is a somewhat hollow victory, in particular because it took someone being killed in order to turn the tide, and also because we can be sure that the alt-right, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, identitarians, whatever you want to call them, they will lick their wounds and resurface. They will try all this again. So what we need to do is remember who these people are, remember what they stand for, and remember what they do when given a chance. I titled this video The True Alt-Right because of that particular clip from earlier, in which the speaker urges the crowd to remember the first precept of the true alt-right. And this is exactly how we should remember these people too. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Sorry about the delay getting this video out there. It was a bit of a monster to make, as I'm sure you can imagine, and I got rather sick right in the middle of editing it, which was just terrible. If you feel sorry enough for me and you'd like to see more videos like this or the others on me channel, you can head over to Patreon and send me $1 or $2. And thank you again to all me supporters whose generosity makes it possible for me to keep doing this. You can also follow me on Twitter or send me a question on Curious Cat. I'll put those links below. And as a note here at the end, I half expect this video to possibly be flagged down with a series of false reports. There's obviously several points in it where you could clip someone out of context saying something horrible and then report it to YouTube's algorithm. And I'll take it as a point of pride if it does get flagged down. Of course, because it would be far-right chumps flagging their own hate speech. Regardless, if it does get taken down, feel free to mirror this video on whatever platform you like. Mirroring flagged videos has proven to be an excellent counter to the far-right tactic of false flagging criticism. So if it does happen, you're more than welcome to rehost it. Okay, thanks folks. That's all from me today, and I'll see you next time.